On this episode of Newt's World, my guest today just returned from a trip to Lithuania and Israel. But the issue most concerning to him right now is the Chinese Communist Party's ability to conduct a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign against Taiwan. This campaign might be able to deliver Taiwan to the Chinese Communist Party with minimal damage. So what should the United States do to stop it? I'm really pleased to welcome my guest, Admiral Mark Montgomery, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mark, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Thank you for having me today here, sir.
It's a very important topic. Admiral Samuel Paparo, commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on April 10th, said that, quote, China's increasing aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals. Do you think China is ramping up for something, or are these just military exercises?
Sam is right. Admiral Paparo, the PACOM commander, the Chinese are rehearsing. Now, I think what's important to understand here is that that is the most dangerous scenario where they do this kind of cross-strait invasion. That's what they're rehearsing for. Maybe the next most dangerous is a full-scale blockade. But what's really got me worried, Newt, is something less than that, what we call the most likely scenario in the military, and the one that you really need to make sure you're planning for, and that's a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign against Taiwan. But my personal belief is General Secretary Xi will not do that unless he knows that should the conflict escalate, he could win a cross-strait invasion. So Admiral Paparo, as PACOM, he's preparing for that cross-strait invasion, making sure Chairman Xi never wakes up in the morning and says, I could go. If I had to, I could. And that way we prevent the cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign that I think is ongoing and would just have to be slightly increased on the rheostat for China to be able to do it.
How big a challenge would it be for the Chinese communists to actually try to invade and occupy Taiwan?
This is really hard. There's one military in the world that I know could do it, and it's us. But I wouldn't want to do it against our own defenses. This is a very dangerous thing. And also, inevitably, you damage the heck out of Taiwan. I mean, they want Taiwan for very historical, cultural, societal reasons, and they would take it broken, but they would prefer to take it whole. And to take it whole, I think, is to get Taiwan to bend the knee. So because it's so hard, because it would be so calamitous, I think that drives China towards seeking a solution where they break the societal resilience of Taiwan, bring them to heel, and then integrate them fully into their economy.
Currently, the Chinese they're actually producing slightly more fighters than we are, about 1.2 to 1. And our shipbuilding capacity has just collapsed, something I'd like you to sort of comment on. How concerned are you that, despite the efforts of the new Trump administration, that in the short run, the Chinese are clearly out-preparing us?
Well, you're exactly right. In fact, the shipbuilding number is much worse than the fighter number. The number of warships they're producing is 3 to 4 to 5 to 1 we're producing each year. The number of merchant ships, by the way, is 200 to 1 if you really want to get uncomfortable. And you're absolutely right. This is not unsolvable. Korea has 2 great big shipyards, both of which can produce a support ship, an oiler or a logistics ship, for about 28 cents on the dollar that a U.S. shipyard would produce it at. So that tells you 2 things. 1, we can get better. 2, we're going to need help. The president's got a great idea with this executive order. And Senators Kelly and Wicker and others have been pushing this for years. They've got a team set up at the NSC just to work this, led by a guy named Dr. Jerry Hendricks. This whole setup, we can get this right. The problem is, it took us 40 years to get in this hole. We're not going to get out in 4. And the hardest thing in government is to commit to a strategic plan to fix something that your successor will enjoy. That just is not how our presidents have operated for the last 20 years. And so I'm concerned that they won't make the number one thing, which is restore our actual shipbuilding capability, reach out to the Koreans for help, and get this fixed.
In the short run, could we, in fact, still make it prohibitively expensive to come across the strait?
We can. That's the beauty. Right now, they couldn't. An admiral named Phil Davidson back in 2021 said, hey, China could execute this by 2027. That's based on something we did when I was at Indo-PACOM as the J3. I would draw a line that said, here's U.S. capability with our allies, slightly upslope, a little bit of slope gain, 1 or 2% every year. And here's the Chinese capability to do the invasion. It was exponential and crossing us in 2027. What Admiral Davidson forgot to say was that this could happen in 2027 unless we take action or China fails to take action. And a number of things have happened since 2021. Number one, Russia invaded Ukraine. And we had a holy cow moment on munitions, which was one of our big shortfalls, not just in ground stuff in Ukraine, anti-ship stuff and anti-air stuff out in the Pacific. We've really been working on that. Japan's gotten crazy. They're doubling their defense budget over about a 5-year period or 4-year period. Taiwan's increased their defense spending, and they're going to hit 3% of GDP this year. Australia's increased their defense spending. Philippines has gotten more integrated with us with the election of Marcos Jr. And then, most importantly, China screwed up COVID response. As a result, they've slowed. So we've increased our upslope. They've decreased their exponential gain. If you ask me, that intersection is now 2030, 2031, and we can keep pushing it. So, sir, there's a lot we can do. And I'll say one last thing. I wouldn't believe my son's a young officer, an ensign, and he selected a ship out of Japan. I would have been counseling hard against that if I thought that this was a loser.
Somebody else had pointed out to me, by the way, that the way the two straits work north and south of Taiwan, that it's actually really dangerous for the Chinese communists to get west of Taiwan because they literally could get cut off and not be capable of getting back.
That's right. Once they get a lodgment, let's say they get a lodgment down south, which I think where they'll get a lodgment, they've got to keep logistically, refreshing it. And if there's something we're really good at, it's killing things on the move. I mean, we have the best targeting complex. We have long-range missiles. If you have a high-value target, like lots of logistics coming across, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So that's number one. Number two, they've got to get east of Taiwan and keep our air power away. That is hard. Our Air Force is obviously the preeminent Air Force in the world. The F-35 has demonstrated over Iran twice in the last year, and by us on many occasions, to be the preeminent fighter in the world. The B-2 is the preeminent bomber in the world. Those PLA forces east of Taiwan, they're all going to go away. And the question is, how fast can we move them back to get air power? So this is a hard fight for the Chinese, a military that now has 0 people that have served in combat.
That's the other thing, which is that as the Russians learned on their 3-day journey to Kiev, it turns out if you've not done it and you haven't practiced it, it's really, really hard.
You're right. And in fact, I was one of the people they called, I'd been the U.S. European Command Deputy Director for Plan, so I spent a lot of time with the Ukrainians. I was called in before the invasion, and, I gave the wrong estimate, like everyone else. I said the Russian army is going to cut through them like a hot knife through butter. What all of us failed to understand was they're no longer a large-scale maneuver army. They can't do logistics. This is what we're great at. I mean, civilian-wise, we're great. Amazon, UPS, FedEx. We're just really good at logistics. Our problem, by the way, the military is the last mile. Like, how do I get rounds to an infantryman on the front line that last couple hundred yards to get it to him? The Russian problem was the first mile, as they left their bases, their fuel, their communications, their food, their command and control. It all ceased to function, and they ground to a halt, halfway to Kiev. That's an important lesson for us. We take our logistics for granted. We can't do that. We have to continue to invest in it and remind ourselves only one country in the world can do large-scale maneuver warfare, and that's the United States.
Well, and frankly, as you move towards artificial intelligence and robotics, we're going to have all sorts of solutions that are going to revolutionize our capacity to do this stuff.
Yeah, and small modular reactors. When I was PACOM J3, you had this 400,000 troops, 500,000 troops spread over a third of the world. You're trying to get them logistics. It was a nightmare. And the biggest nightmare was fuel. Getting fuel to not just to planes or ships, but to equipment, to ground gear. I'm of the belief, I've been taking a lot of briefs from these guys who are running 1 to 5 megawatt small modular reactors. They're not that far away. They're basically in a sea air land container. I'm a nuclear engineer in the Navy. I understand what inherently safe means. These are inherently safe, the way we cool the reactors and such. So I feel very comfortable that that's going to be a long-term solution for the U.S. military.
One of the things you've been focusing on is it possible with a cyber campaign to subdue Taiwan without physical violence? Walk us through that. I mean, I think that's revolutionary and probably right.
The Taiwan leadership believes, I've briefed this to both former President Tsai and current President Lai and his whole team. They understand exactly what you just said. What I think China is going to do, they could come to the conclusion they could not win a cross-strait invasion, but also come to the conclusion that we're not willing to fight it. If either of those two happens, they will turn the rheostat on financial, energy, and communications critical infrastructure. So what I mean by that is they will conduct 9 cyber attacks on them. So things like on the energy infrastructure, put a missile closure area around the southern LNG port, liquid natural gas port. Liquid natural gas is 50% of the Taiwan grid, and they have 6 days of excess supply, really stowage, and they get 1 LNG a day. So if you stop the 1 LNG a day from coming, and you can do it by a missile closure area, you might call their largest distributor, Qatar, if you're China, and say, you give 5% to Taiwan that you give to us. We think you should stop giving to Taiwan. They just might. You convince some of the countries that have flagged these LNG shipping, don't go to Taiwan. There's all kinds of things you can do in there. In communications, you could drop an anchor, and that's happened more times than we can count now, on submarine cables that produce 95% of the internet flow in the world on these submerged cables. And there's things you can do to banks, stop payments from mainland Chinese facilities to Taiwan. And then lay on top of it a cyber attack that hits the electrical grid. One thing I'll say about, in addition to having that stowage problem with LNG, the Taiwan grid operates at 78 or 75% capacity at all times. That's the highest in the OECD. Ours is like 47%. And maybe California is 60% because they're crazy. But those are inherently fragile electrical power grids when you're operating above 60%. And they're at 74%, the most of an OECD country. So they're very vulnerable to a cyber attack on that grid. And there's cyber attacks you can do on the financial services systems, on the communications networks. Will Taiwan get access to Starlink? There's going to be a lot of pressure on Elon Musk from the Chinese to not allow that to happen. So there's all these factors in there that give China opportunity. What we've got to do is figure out, and we're running tabletops for this, that say, look, how do you prevent this? How do you mitigate it when it starts to happen? And how do you respond so you can recover really rapidly? If you can fix all those things and demonstrate that to China ahead of time, you then restore deterrence in this very hard area.
It seems to me that that's both a defensive cyber strategy, but the capacity for a very aggressive offensive cyber strategy, which we really haven't demonstrated much of.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that's very interesting for us is that we have not responded. We have allowed the level of acceptable activity by the adversary. The adversary could be China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, or criminal actors. We've allowed the bar about which we'll respond to be elevated over 4 or 5 administrations to a very high level. You know what the result of that is, Newt? That's why Volt Typhoon happened. Volt Typhoon was a Chinese advanced persistent threat. So a Chinese attack team inserted malicious software into our rail, financial services, aviation, ports, all our critical infrastructures. In Guam, Hawaii, maybe the West Coast, they have a map of the U.S. I'm pretty sure they hit everything. And we gave them a hat tip, like, good move, boys. If they had done this with 1,000 backpacks with Semtex in it and put the same kind of effective malware, something that disrupts this critical infrastructure in wartime, with a note that said, courtesy to the PLA, maybe a middle finger, we might be at war. But somehow, like I said, in cyberspace, we're like, good job, boys, hat tip. So we have raised the bar for what we'll respond to an unacceptably high level. So we have not demonstrated our cyber bona fides. People know we have good offensive capabilities. They suspect we do things, but we haven't actually done things to hold China accountable with it.
How much of that is the culture of the National Security Agency? In this whole sense of we don't want people to know what we can really do, so we never do what we can really do.
Or worse, I've got this great tool and this great access. I don't want to burn it. You know, my answer to that is we pay you a lot of money, billions. Have more tools, more accesses. By the way, the Chinese don't appear to be constrained by that tools and accesses problem. They're going crazy on our systems. And look, I know we like to have a higher level of plausible deniability. I get it. We have a higher attention to collateral, unexpected collateral damage. I get it. It's harder for democracies to fight in this gray zone, but it's not impossible. And we need to do a much better job at it.
Well, and then frankly, we might like them to know that we're doing it.
Exactly. I call that deterrence by demonstration. I think every once in a while, you got to pull one of the monkeys out and beat them. You really have to demonstrate that you have the capability to do something and a willingness to use it. And this is what Mike Waltz said. He's had a rough few months. But one of the really smart things he said coming in was we need to be more offensive in our reply. And I think I would put offensive in both terms. I offend you, and I'm more offensive. And I think we really need to do that, particularly to the Chinese.
Let me go back to Taiwan for a second. The degree to which the entire planet relies on Taiwan for computer chips is an astonishing vulnerability.
By the way, that's logic chips. If you go to memory chips, they're all from Korea. So we're dependent on a lot of our allies and partners. If I had told you we're dependent on the UK for these, you'd probably let it go. Now look, the UK is not 80 kilometers from Russia. I get it. There's a lot of reasons I like Taiwan. One, they're the one Chinese country I know that's a democracy with a freedom of the press, free elections, and a market-based system, right? And I think they're a great example to mainland China that you could have done this, you chose not to. But they're our partner. They really, for all intents and purposes, they're an ally. I know we don't call them that, but the Taiwan Relations Act established the conditions. I mean, we've agreed to sell you the weapons you need to defend yourself, and we've agreed to make a war plan to come defend you. I know there's no Article 5 there, although I'm not sure what an Article 5 is worth at this exact second. But there's a level of partnership and alliance. So I try not to overreact to that. I do think there's some things that should be home-shored or put in Canada or Mexico, very closely shored, kind of USMCA shored, so that we can have better guaranteed access to it in wartime. But it's not all of Taiwan. It's a percentage of what Taiwan's doing. And it would be too expensive. The CHIPS Act might move 3 or 4 or 5% of our reliance from Taiwan to the United States, maybe 5%. And that was what, 52 billion plus several hundred billion worth of company investment.
So they really are a sort of a world asset.
Yeah. Smart country, right?
Do you think that was a conscious strategy?
Not initially. The conscious strategy was after the president on occasion says something that's not quite right. He says Taiwan stole TSMC. They did not steal TSMC. Texas Instruments allowed TSMC to go to Taiwan. When Morris Chang, the team left, when they weren't being properly promoted and advocated for, in their opinion, went to Taiwan. There's a book called Chip Wars, pretty good on it. Taiwan definitely created the conditions for success for TSMC and a more legacy chip company called UMC. And those companies have thrived. I would say if you took a strict WTO-like microscope to it, you wouldn't be happy with everything they did there. But they created the conditions for success. I think somewhere around 2008, they started to realize, hey, this is something that can become part of our security envelope. And by 2015, it was a security envelope. So I think not the initial intention. The initial intention was make money. The final intention was security coverage.
You did an article for National Interest, March 21st, entitled "To Confront China, President Trump Should Target Its State-Owned Enterprises." And I just noticed today that there's a indication that in all of their tariff negotiations, they're going to have weakening the Chinese relationship as a function of getting to an agreement. That apparently their strategy in part is to methodically begin isolating China and breaking its trade relations. Is this a rational approach?
That's pretty big. Look, I'm still from the school of if my sneakers aren't made by Uyghur prisoners, I'll buy them from China because they're a lot cheaper. But there's a list of emerging technologies that we should not do foreign direct investment in, do co-production with, do joint ventures with, or purchase for our critical infrastructure, our government, or our military. And that list is getting longer. In fact, my biggest problem up at Congress, because I work every year with legislation about drones or LiDAR or silicon carbide, all kinds of different things that we're trying, TikTok, that we're trying to get ourselves off of. And, most congressmen, as you know, they're good men and women. They want to do the right thing. But more than one said to me, how many more things are there, Mark? And I said, it's unlimited. It's how many places is China going to invest as part of their 2025 and 2035 plans. And I'll tell you one thing about China, they lay it out. It may be in Mandarin, and I have to have somebody translate it for me, but they lay out their plans. And we're going to have to confront them in all these emerging technologies. So to the degree that the White House targets the right emerging technologies for that, that's the right call. If they try to do everything everywhere all at once, I think that's going to be overly prescriptive and really jam a lot of our partners and allies throughout Asia if we try to block all that trade.
How likely is it that our partners will just get irritated enough with us that they'll decide China's a better partner?
Right, that's a big step, right? It's not the economic step. That hurts, right? Because China's economic negotiations are, we're a big country, you're a small country, now listen to what's going to happen. Oh, we've only had one president do that, and it's kind of, as you can see, it's been stop and go. It's hard for us to be that country. But in security, I don't know that Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Singapore, or Australia are willing to make China their security partner of choice. I think that's too big a pitch divot. Here's who would, though. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. They've already got Cambodia and Laos, and you can keep them. But those last three, take a look at where Chairman Xi just visited. Right? He just did bilateral meetings with each of them. And I guarantee you, he's saying, look how I act. I'm predictable. You may not like everything I do, but I'm predictable. Look how he acts. And that's a problem for us.
It creates a sense of insecurity because it's not predictable.
Particularly in Asia, that's a problem.
Let me ask you about your most recent trips. On the one side, you were on the edge of Russia, and on the other side, you're in one of the most difficult security problems in the world. Talk about both of those. What are your thoughts now that you've just been there?
Sure. So first, I went to Lithuania. It's tough. It's one of these weird things. You go to Lithuania, very few American, no government people showing up for conferences. Every administration has at the beginning of the administration. It's especially being enforced during this administration. Even generals and admirals, career people can't show up. So I'm there, and the Europeans were coming after me pretty hard on panels. I said, hey, wait a minute. Let's be clear here. The problem you have in Europe is you Eastern Europeans are committed to your defense. You're doing exactly what Donald Trump said. There's 3 Balts are all hitting 4% this year or in the next 12 months and 5% in the next 18 months. Poland's already at 4.6%, headed to 5%. Those 4 countries, you're fantastic. Great commitment, no GDP to have this based on. Then Germany, and they're there. The Germans, the Brits, and the French are there. I'm like, you guys have all the GDP, and you're a solid 1.5 to 2.1%. President Trump's right. I don't know if I'll call it freeloading, but you have been overly reliant on us, and it's time for you to spend 3 to 4% of your defense on GDP. It's time for you to stop making energy deals with the Russians. It's time for you to decide, do you consider Vladimir Putin a threat? If you do, take the normal actions you would take if there was a bully in your backyard. And don't just have us point to the Eastern Europeans and say they're doing it. Because most of those Balts, I think their total GDP probably doesn't add up much past 10 billion, right? I mean, that's a little more than that, but not much more.
A large American county.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have that problem. And then you have to be honest with them. Look, I don't think it was just President Trump saying it in 2017. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Crimea in 2014 and his invasion of Ukraine more broadly in 2022 is what's driving them up. And whatever it is, I don't care. But the Western Europeans have to match the Eastern Europeans. And they need to do it quick because there is a anti-European. You can see it in those signal texts. There's a strong anti-European vibe among some of the president's closest national security advisors. Not Mike Waltz, but some of the other ones that should really make Europe scared. When people say that in a text that they think no one will read, that's probably what they believe. And there's a strong anti-European sentiment from both Vice President Vance and Secretary of Defense Hegseth.
Well, and in a sense, all they're doing is acting out what Trump has said publicly. I mean, the Europeans have to get their act together.
I agree. And I think President Trump's more of an opportunist than an isolationist.
Nothing he's done indicates isolationism. He has golf courses and hotels across the planet. He's married to a European. His mother came from Scotland. I think one of his sons was in the Balkans looking at opening up a hotel. But I think he's rabidly committed to America.
So I'm hoping that we're going to reduce our presence in Europe, but I think we can do it in a smart way. Before the Ukraine invasion, there was about 50,000 plus U.S. troops spread throughout Europe, permanently living there in Germany and Italy and UK. I hope we don't touch those because those are all enablers. They would allow Americans to fight. They could be anywhere. They help us fight in the Middle East. They help us fight in Africa. They help us fight in Europe. Keep them there. We then had about 15 to 20,000 rotating through Poland because we liked what Poland was doing in the Balts. And then we added about 15 to 20,000 to help the Ukrainian effort. I think their drawdown should be of that third group. Hey, draw that down. If we're telling Europe, you take over this training mission, you take over this logistics mission in a very measured way where Europe comes in, we go out, withdraw that force. And I think leave yourself with the permanent forces that enable warfighting around the world from European logistics heads and the forces that are in Eastern Europe that are a real deterrent. I mean, they're not the Berlin Brigade. They're more than that. They're a division, but they're a real deterrent to Putin doing something that would be a bad deal for us. If a Baltic state, according to Donald Trump's current math, if a Baltic state or Poland is invaded, he will defend them. He said, if you spend the right amount of money, I'll defend you. You're the kind of ally I like. Well, those are the kind of allies we like, and they're the most likely to be invaded. We better keep the deterrent force there that says, hey, I'm serious. Don't do this, Vladimir.
From your perspective, can the Ukrainians continue to fight?
I didn't mention this before, but I go to Ukraine every quarter or so, every 2 quarters, and do some training there with their senior officers for a couple of weeks. So I have a pretty good perception of them. Look, I didn't command an Army division or corps or anything like that. I'm a Navy officer. But I have a good understanding of resilience in senior officers, resilience in the senior enlisted. The Ukrainians are tough. They are not buckling. Zelensky is an outward, he reflects his country in a way many leaders don't. I mean, he really does reflect what they feel.
So, how long can Putin withstand the scale of sacrifices? They have lost a lot of people.
That's the interesting thing. Whose resilience breaks first? Is it the West, which now is really Europe? Is it the Ukrainians or the Russians? I think the Russians are in play on this. He's got a real problem there. So here's what I'd say. First, to your other question, I do want to say the Europeans can provide the money that Ukraine needs to buy some European equipment and mostly American equipment. It kind of bummed me out the other night. Zelensky said, I need to buy Patriots. And President Trump was dismissive. I'm like, sir, that's exactly what you want him to do. Take someone else's money, go to Raytheon and buy $15 billion worth of Raytheon stuff, and then go shoot it at a bad guy. I think we can get to yes on that. As I said, he's an opportunist. Let him come around on it.
My hunch is that they may be wrong, but I think that he and Witkoff honestly believe they're on the edge of a deal.
They're not. I think they're wrong.
Look, I'm with you. I'm very skeptical, but I'm reflecting what I think. The reason I think they are so overtly soft on Putin is to say, look, you can relax and agree to a ceasefire.
I think you're right. And I think you're right to think that they might be misjudging Putin. And so to get to your other question, Putin's got this weird dynamic going. 35%, maybe 40% of his GDP is fossil fuel sales. Fossil fuel prices cratered during the tariffs. Thank you, President Trump. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and OPEC have increased output, making it harder for Russia to sell. And if we were to move in with a third element and really, really secondary sanction the shadow fleet, that means going after Chinese and Indian companies that are buying, its ability to get that 35 to 40% will be put in jeopardy. Here's the other crushing fact for him. His federal budget's basically two things, 40% on defense, 60% on babushka, buying off his base. That's even a high percentage by American standards, right? And so he's going to have trouble. If you reduce the amount going in, he either has to decrease defense spending or decrease support to his base. I don't think he's really excited about doing either of those. No politician would be, but particularly Putin. So that's going to be a tough thing for him. I guarantee you there'll be no critical infrastructure work done in Russia for the next 5 years because of the commitments they've done. And they have bad critical infrastructure to begin with. So yes, is he at risk? I think so. But the other problem is he's an authoritarian. He doesn't break until he fully disintegrates. Democracies break when the people begin to lose faith in the leadership. And that comes much earlier than the disintegration.
Yeah, I think that's right. Tell me just briefly about your visit to Israel.
So I say on Israel, first, there's a war going on in Gaza. It's not a small war. It's a big war. And what's going on is Hamas still exists. Israel has basically been told by everyone else, go get rid of that problem. Now, no one said it out loud because they want to be able to criticize Israel privately, except for the United States. But the Saudis, the UAE, Qatar, whoever's going to pay to rebuild and finance whatever becomes of Gaza, they need Hamas cleared out. The Egyptians who are going to provide the security, and I use that term loosely with the Egyptians, are not going to be able to defeat Hamas. So they need Hamas really disarmed and defeated to the greatest degree possible when they enter to provide security. Who's going to have to do that? Israel. This is at the sacrifice of those hostages. The hostages are either going to be killed because they're strapped to high-value targets and when the Israelis target them, or they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they're executed. I feel very uncomfortable for the remaining hostages. But this is a hard deal. We're 18 months into this almost. They've got to take care of business, and they've got to destroy these. And so what I saw was armor, heavy small arms fire, and then significant air power being applied. And the big lesson for Israel here is they better have munitions orders with the United States. Donald Trump is an open store to them, which they should take full advantage of. And I've been telling them, slow down on like building your own defense industrial base right now. Buy munitions now, because they need to buy 2,000, 1,500 pounders, tank rounds, 120 millimeter artillery rounds to be ready for their next fight. And they need to buy arrow. Here's the last thing I'll tell you. The Israelis have always told me for 20 years, they always said, we never want U.S. troops on our soil defending us. You know what they have today? U.S. troops manning THAAD batteries, shooting down Houthi weapons and preparing to shoot down Iranian weapons. And they need them because they're low on arrow, is my guess. I mean, otherwise they'd have never let this happen. So they need to build arrow. These guys need to buy munitions like drunken sailors for 4 solid years. And we need to be the munitions factory that does it for them.
When you have a people's war in an urban area, how do you actually destroy Hamas?
I think it's destroy and disarm as much as possible. At some point, you got to give it to the Egyptians. And then destroy the whole tunnel network. Then I got to tell you, the Egyptians, when their own security is in there, I hope they have the good graces to not allow Hamas to build a tunnel network to Egypt, which, despite us giving them $1.3 billion a year for 3 decades, they allowed Hamas to build a underground network that allowed all those terrorists to go out and get trained in Iran and elsewhere, in Turkey and other places. I mean, this is insane. The Egyptians need as much help as they can get. I don't think they're a competent army.
What do you think happens with Iran?
Look, if I were president, I would actually impose costs on them right now for the Houthis. The Houthis are still shooting weapons, by the way, at our ships.
You're not going to bomb the Houthis into submission.
They'll find another ragged, Bedouin area. Well, they'll keep moving. What you need to do is hold their primary sponsor accountable, the person who provides them with a lot of their equipment and a lot of their money, and that's Iran. We should strike the Iranian port that they ship from, Iranian production facilities that the Israelis didn't strike, because they struck a lot of them, and 1 or 2 of their spy ships. And we can do this, I won't say cost-free. Every combat sortie has risk. But it's pretty clear to me now that Elon Musk was not right about the F-35, right? It can destroy the 4th largest air defense system in the world without loss. So we can do this mission with B-2s and do that. I'm not talking about the full nuclear mission. I think you do a hard destructive mission that says, hey, boys, the U.S. is in. After 17 years of saying we might bomb you, we actually bombed you. When Steve Witkoff shows up, we want to see a lot of grace. And if we don't see it, we'll talk to our IDF friends and we'll come visit you again. And this time we'll bring B-2s and we'll take care of your nuclear enterprise. To me, that's the long-term solution here. Start with a strike that says we're freaking serious. See where it goes diplomatically. And if it doesn't work, then solve it militarily.
If you were advising Trump, would you say that at some point, if Putin continues to target civilians, that we have to pretty dramatically raise the cost for him?
Yeah, what I would do is sell them give them ATACMS through PDA, our long-range strike weapons. Marry them. The first ones we gave them, President Biden didn't give them the good targeting data and didn't give them permissions. So they now have good targeting data. They now have permissions to strike inside Russia. Give them more ATACMS, and we have lots of them. Give them some. Tell them you can't strike civilian targets. Strike legitimate military and military service and critical infrastructure targets only. Our ATACMS are accurate, and they'll have a successful attack. And you tell Trump, Putin, you did it. Hey, the next attack, they get ATACMS. The attack happens, you give them ATACMS. And you say, we gave them ATACMS, by the way. Enjoy.
Right. Got it. That's great. You're always remarkable. And Mark, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to let our listeners know they can find more about the work you're doing by visiting your website for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies at fdd.org. And I really appreciate you taking time to be with us.
Hey, thank you for having me, sir. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you to my guest, Admiral Mark Montgomery. You can get a link to Foundation for Defense of Democracies on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.